He thought he was the law. He believed that his white skin gave him the right to plant drugs in the car of a black man, then scream in the victim's face, "Explain this, junkie," but he picked the wrong man. The Dashcam recorded everything, from the sneering glance to his filthy hand reaching into the car, and this time, there was no escape. Which state are you in? You won't believe what happened after that accidental move, and you certainly won't forgive him. Watch till the end, or keep telling yourself, that probably didn't happen, like you always do. The parking lot behind the gym was bathed in a faint light, like a layer of dust covering the city whenever it got too late. Elric Boone stepped off the last concrete step without looking back, his shoulders squared as if there was nothing behind him worth acknowledging. He emerged from the MMA gym into the night, his breath still visible in the cold air. In the underground sports world and even within the department, he was known by a short nickname, one that landed like a punch against steel: The Rock. Not because he had ever been in a movie, but because anyone who had trained with him understood punching him was like hitting stone, and the rebound only hurt your hand. The ground beneath his feet was solid, yet his steps made it feel like it sank just slightly with every pace. At an age when many had retreated from the hot zones of the system, Boone remained the one chosen to sit in rooms with unmarked doors, where every piece of information began with suspicion. He walked straight to his car, an old Lincoln that still ran as precisely as the reports he submitted each month. There was no one else in the lot, no other cars pulling out behind him, and no good night drifting down from the second-floor window. Boone didn't need a greeting, he just needed silence. But tonight, that silence was not on his side. Behind him, an engine started, so softly that an average ear might miss it. But Boone didn't miss it. He paused for less than a second, then kept walking as if he hadn't. His shadow stretched across the concrete tiles, cast onto the car window he had cleaned just that morning. He opened the driver's door, set a folder on the passenger seat, then stood upright, eyes locked on the side mirror. A pair of pale white headlights had just turned on, steady, without blinking, no sirens. The SUV behind rolled slowly out of the dark corner of the lot. It didn't pull ahead or block his path. It kept its distance, like an old acquaintance who wasn't invited but still wanted to walk you to the door. Boone didn't rev the engine or show an alarm, but the muscles in his back tightened slightly, the way they did before stepping into the ring against an opponent whose opening move was still unknown. He turned the wheel, easing out of the lot toward the downward exit ramp. The SUV behind shifted angles too, its headlights locked onto Boone's vehicle with surgical precision. Each time Boone turned, the light followed seamlessly, clear proof that the driver wasn't fumbling or hesitating. Whoever was behind him was no rookie. The distance between the cars shrank whenever Boone eased around the first bend. Boone noted it, like he had been trained to detect the shadow of someone closing in. Not through words, not from a drawn weapon, just by sensing they weren't there for traffic. The face inside the SUV hadn't come into full view yet, but a quick flash of the cabin light revealed a clenched jaw and a hand gripping the steering wheel too tightly to be accidental. Boone blinked. The glare from behind bounced off his mirror, narrowing his pupils for a second, but his expression didn't change. Still the same face, unmoved, unswayed, calm enough to wait for a stupid strike. He turned right and merged quietly into the main road. The SUV followed. The lights behind tracked every subtle movement as if Boone was being watched not for any violation, but for simply existing. And at that moment, a name crossed Boone's mind like a pulse of warning: Kip Rayner. Something in the rhythm of the car behind him echoed the surveillance style Boone had once written into an internal memo, the one that mysteriously got shelved 2 months ago. Boone said nothing, but his jaw set tighter. If the man tailing him thought Boone hadn't noticed, then he had already made his first mistake of the night. The voice from the loudspeaker made Boone tilt his head slightly, not from surprise, but because the tone lacked the formality of a duty officer's order. It was personalized, dragging the final syllables as if to intimidate rather than remind. Black Lincoln, plate GE 2214, pull over to the right immediately. Repeating the plate, already clear under the spotlight on the car's rear, was not to confirm the target but to impose extra pressure. Boone pressed the brake, expression unreadable, signaling as protocol dictated. His vehicle eased toward the curb, leaving just enough space to avoid a parking violation. He said nothing. The engine idled, interior lights off, yet his gaze no longer stayed fixed on the wheel. The rearview mirror reflected the slowly parking SUV behind him. Boone glanced briefly, truly focusing for the first time on the figure stepping out, shorter than him but with eyes that still believed the badge on their chest granted superiority. The loudspeaker fell silent, as if one order sufficed. No reason, check, no greeting, just a command in the dead of night aimed at someone freshly exited from a federal building. Boone's hands rested on the wheel, eyes on the mirror. Part of his mind sensed something off, but he couldn't piece it together yet. He had reviewed dozens of reports, night shift complaints edited to avoid HR disruption. He remembered each name passed to internal affairs, the reasons he flagged them, and the long wait as those cases lingered under review. The driver stepping from the SUV was one of them. Boone didn't recognize him at first. In the dim light and half-hidden silhouette, he looked like any cop off shift. But the gait, masking the face but not the habits, betrayed more than a badge ever could. Boone didn't know then that this was Kip Rayner, the very officer Boone had personally flagged for repeated racial profiling during street checks. Now Rayner returned unmasked, with no subterfuge, just one well-timed handshake to turn the suspect into the enforcer. Boone remained still, window up. His reaction wasn't fear, but experience. He knew opening his mouth first meant being defined first. Tonight, he wasn't ready to give that power to anyone, but he didn't yet realize the game had already begun. Rayner wasn't here to check papers. He was here to plant something in the car and to make Elric Boone a name that would never again appear in any hearing. Kip Rayner approached as if tonight were his stage. Both hands rested loosely at his sides, shoulders relaxed, but his movements carried the confidence of someone far too familiar with unquestioned power. His eyes narrowed, scanning swiftly from the back of the car to the side mirror, as if looking for something suspicious even though no indication had ever suggested anything needed checking. The clicks of his heels echoed steadily on the pavement. No rush. The slower the pace, the clearer the intention. Kip was not here to address a violation. He was here to savor a moment. He believed he had waited for a long time. When he stood just 2 steps from the driver's window, he smiled. The smile curved only to one side of his mouth, etched with triumph. There were no standard procedures present in this traffic stop. The flickering street light reflected off his chin, casting his whole face in the likeness of a stage actor who had memorized the villain's role but refused to step off the scene. Boone lowered the window with a single press. Every movement happened slowly, deliberately. He did not glance or blink. Only his voice cut through the tightening silence, low and firm. "What's the reason for the stop, officer?" A question every driver has the right to ask. But in this moment, that question became an act of defiance. Rayner tilted his head slightly, lips pressed together as if surprised Boone would even speak. Boone's tone wasn't loud, nor was it provocative, but the calmness itself caused Rayner to falter for a second. He had expected fear, or at least hesitation. Instead, Boone sat upright, both hands on the steering wheel, unmoving, his eyes never leaving Rayner. That composure made Kip Rayner feel like he had missed a beat. He glanced down at the seat as if to find some last-minute excuse to escalate, but Boone did not move, and nothing suspicious was visible. Rayner looked back up, lips still drawn, and finally answered slowly, "Random check. Authorized to conduct it here." The reply was crafted, thinly veiled with reluctance. He was masking intent behind a worn-out excuse even rookie officers would hesitate to use without backing. But Boone did not focus on the answer. What caught his attention was the way Rayner's finger rested on the edge of the window, exactly at the handle, as if he intended to touch the car before being permitted. Boone stared directly into his eyes without moving an inch, but the space between them had shifted. He did not respond with anger. His gaze held steady like a mirror, reflecting all the discomfort brewing in the man across from him. "Has something happened on this stretch of road?" Boone asked again, this time with a sharper tone. Not harsh, but firm enough to force the other man to assess his position and the reason he was standing there. Reiner did not answer. He gave a faint smile, withdrew his hand from the handle, and straightened up. "It'll be clear in a few minutes," he said, then turned and walked back toward the patrol vehicle. His figure faded into the shadows, but the sound of the rear trunk opening rang out clearly. Boone remained still, but his hands tightened slightly around the steering wheel. The night stayed quiet, but the scent of deceit had begun to rise from those retreating footsteps. Kip Rayner bent slightly forward like an officer performing a routine procedure, but Elric Boone was not someone to overlook small gestures. He watched the officer from start to finish, from the way his eyes scanned inside the car as if searching for a reason, to the moment he rested his hand on the door, holding the metal frame open a few extra seconds without explanation. "Who is the car registered to?" Rayner asked, didn't wait for an answer. His gaze shifted away from Boone, glanced at the passenger seat, then lowered slightly. The movement was neither quick nor hurried, yet lacked the decisiveness typical of a clear law enforcement action. Boone didn't turn his head but instinctively felt his neck stiffen. His professional intuition caught the smallest discord, and this time it wasn't in the question but in the prolonged silence that followed. Rayner said nothing further. He stood straight, his eyes slightly shifting before lightly tapping the car door, signaling the matter was settled. Yet the next moment he tilted his head and said, "Can you step out of the car?" Boone didn't resist. He opened the door, stepped out, keeping his eyes on Rayner's every move. The space between them was small but charged with shifting tension. Rayner didn't back down, standing there, hand resting on the flashlight at his belt, neither drawing it nor explaining. Streetlight cast a slanting shadow over his face, muting a slight smirk into darkness, but his eyes remained bright with someone convinced of their power and unchallenged. Boone narrowed his eyes. "If you intend to search the vehicle, I request a supervising officer be called." "Do you doubt me?" Rayner replied, his voice lowering, almost a smile mixed with a threat. Boone said nothing. He turned, stood before his car's hood, arms relaxed, eyes back to comprehensive vigilance. He didn't know why his heartbeat skipped, but something was off, and his instincts never failed. The SUV behind still shone its light on his back. Rayner's shadow stretched down the curb, tracing the faint oil streak the patrol car always left when idling. Then Rayner turned, walked around to the rear. The trunk opened, and the faint clink of a plastic box being pulled from storage was heard. Boone glanced over his shoulder. What was he doing? Checking luggage? Personal items? Or preparing something Boone hadn't foreseen? No questions were asked. No administrative check was spoken aloud. Just a series of murky actions under a city night with no passers-by. Elric Boone circled halfway, walking slowly toward his car, eyes fixed on Rayner, fumbling near the patrol car's tailgate. He knew people like this, how they acted when they thought no one watched. But he also knew the most reliable witness wasn't words. It was the device mounted on his windshield, silently recording every detail. Tonight, even if Boone hadn't realized what had just happened, everything was documented, every second. Boone stood motionless as the headlights from the patrol car beamed straight into his face, forcing his eyes to blink slightly to adjust. The sharp white light spread across his facial muscles like an invisible blade. His eyes stayed open, but his pupils contracted, making the scene ahead both vivid and distorted. His shadow stretched long across the asphalt, like a dark scratch, trailing from his feet to the front of the car. In that gaze, Boone no longer appeared to be in control of the situation. He looked more like a figure pinned to an isolated target, silent and forbidden to move. No questions were asked, no explanation was given for why he was being held, and no other officer had shown up, even though more than 7 minutes had passed since Rayner ordered him out of the car. The entire street remained silent. A breeze swept by, sending scraps of paper spinning along the curb. The patrol car's headlights didn't just illuminate Boone's face. They cut through his shoulders, casting the outline of his tense muscles under the harsh glare. His body stayed still, but his mind began tracing every subtle sign behind him. Behind him, rummaging sounds surfaced. The sound of a hand brushing against plastic, the pop of a container being opened, the noise of someone pretending to be casual while moving far too hastily to conceal it. Boone did not turn around, but each sound slipped into the base of his neck like a splinter, making the hairs on his nape tighten. That feeling, the one he knew from past experiences exposing corrupt colleagues, returned intact, as though something had just been taken out of its rightful context and was about to be redefined with a lie. "Well, look what I found." Rayner's voice burst from behind like a punch through the silence. He didn't call Boone by name or mention rank, just shouted as if performing for some invisible audience. That tone wasn't the result of a genuine discovery. It was rehearsed, deliberate, and scripted, emphasized for effect, and backed by intent. Boone still didn't move. Not a single hurried reaction, but his eyes lowered slightly, as if weighing whether to turn around or stay still and let the other man complete his performance. Inside, every suspicion started lighting up like an electric circuit. The vague reason for the stop, the evasive demeanor, the dishonest gaze, and now this announcement, sounding as if practiced in front of a mirror. Rayner walked to the front of the vehicle, holding something in his hand, raising it high under the headlights, making the object appear to glow in the air. But he did not approach Boone, nor did he ask for confirmation. Instead, he turned toward the patrol car and began muttering, as if reading an official report. Boone took a deep breath. For the first time that night, his face didn't hide the tension. It wasn't fear. It was the understanding that in that exact moment, the situation had stepped beyond the personal. Once someone fabricates evidence to frame another, especially someone in uniform, every word and every action from here on would no longer belong to two individuals. It would belong to a system, an investigation, and possibly a case watched by the media in excruciating detail. He wasn't sure what Rayner was holding, but one thing was certain. Before getting into the car tonight, there had been nothing unusual on the passenger seat, and if someone was trying to fabricate a false narrative, what Boone needed now wasn't argument, but time for the recording device to finish its job. Boone slowly turned, took one step toward the headlights, his eyes locked on the object in Rayner's hand. And in that tension, no one knew that the most important moment had already been silently captured. From an angle no one had thought of, the man raised the plastic bag as if he had just pulled shocking evidence from a major case. Under the harsh white beams, the thin layer of plastic reflected both the car's spotlight and the orange glow from a distant sign. Rayner's other hand pointed directly at Boone, his fingers stiff like a spear aimed at the man's chest. "Is this yours?" he barked, not to ask but to declare. It was a sound crafted so that anyone hearing it would assume the criminal had been caught red-handed, and the only thing left to do was bow in shame, as if trained to do so. Boone didn't move. He didn't need to look at the plastic bag because he knew he had never carried anything that could be mistaken. But Rayner stepped closer, still raising the bag, still pointing his finger like each word to follow would be a strike. "Told you," he snapped. "Guys like you look clean, but your car stinks worse than highway trash." His voice hardened, biting off each word. Boone stared straight into his eyes, unwavering, unflinching. That silence threw Rayner off, just for a second, because he had been waiting for a denial, a reaction, a flare of anger. But all he got was a muscular black man standing solid, facing him, denying nothing, admitting nothing, simply watching, as if holding up a mirror. "What? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just used to flashing your badge and walking free?" Rayner growled, the bag still raised like a prop in front of some invisible jury. Boone took a slow breath. This wasn't the first time he'd heard a line like that. It wasn't foreign to someone who had lived on the line between duty and the cold stares reserved for someone who looked like him. But tonight, he knew something was different, and he had no idea when that bag had entered his vehicle. Boone squinted slightly, his voice low, steady. "You sure about that?" Rayner paused for just a beat, enough for the veins in his neck to tighten. He didn't answer, and that was when Boone understood. If this man believed he had cornered his prey, then Boone would be the one to pull the emergency exit with Rayner's hand. But not yet. The performance wasn't over, because one critical witness was still watching silently, mounted to the windshield, saying nothing, reacting to nothing, but recording every move and every word from the man holding up the accusation. Not far away, the flashing light from a small diner's sign reflected off the pavement, forming a chaotic orange streak. A delivery driver in a hooded jacket had just pulled over to the curb. He reached for his phone to check the time, but what caught his eye instead was the scene of two men facing off under the blinding headlights, one of them holding a plastic bag aloft like a prop of accusation on a late-night street. He didn't need to hear it clearly to know. The expression on the white officer's face was not one of concern or assistance. It resembled a confrontation familiar from the inherited memory of his community, now unfolding right before him. He stepped close to a utility pole nearby, leaned in and raised his phone. He let the camera record steadily, the pulsing orange light behind him casting a faint glow onto the screen as if it were capturing evidence long overdue. Boone didn't look at the person filming. His eyes remained fixed on Kip Rayner, as if the entire world had narrowed into the straight line between them. Though the headlights bore down directly, though a finger pointed at his face, though a plastic bag was shaken in front of him, Boone didn't move. His face didn't twitch in anger, didn't contort in confusion, but remained still, cold, and tight like a stone surface about to crack. Only his voice came out after a long enough pause to compress the air itself. "You're fabricating a story to blame the wrong man." The voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, steady, and clear in every breath. It wasn't meant to make Rayner retreat. It was meant to stamp the pavement between them with a boundary that from this point forward demanded justification. Rayner curled his lips into a grin, masking a slight jaw clench by spitting onto the curb. "Oh, so now you're going to teach me what the right man looks like? You think that upright posture, that righteous tone of yours, can wash away what I just found?" Rayner gave the plastic bag a light shake, then tucked it into a zip pocket on his chest, continuing in a voice that refused to let go. "Just keep standing there. In a few minutes, you'll be facing another camera, the kind juries like to see." Boone still didn't react, but his eyes shifted. It wasn't from the threat, but from a detail. Why would an officer, upon finding supposed evidence, not call for a witness, not seal the scene, not report to dispatch? He didn't say it aloud, but every nerve ending on Boone's body had already registered the irregularity. This wasn't a routine stop. This was a setup, and Rayner was running a script he'd rehearsed. Only he'd cast the wrong lead. A breath pressed in Boone's chest, but instead of pushing out a rebuttal, he stepped slightly forward, moving toward the line dividing the two vehicles. His foot touched the edge of a shadow cast by the street lamp, where his voice rang out again, not aimed at Rayner this time, but as if addressing the space itself. "There are many ways to bring a man down. Yours is the cheapest I've ever seen." The camera by the pole kept recording. The delivery man said nothing, but his hand began to tremble slightly as he realized he'd just become an uninvited witness, and perhaps that fact alone would make this whole story impossible to erase like so many before. Rayner remained where he was, but this time his hand tightened over his chest pocket, not to secure something, but to hide the reflex of a man who had just stepped deeper into waters than he thought he would. And Boone knew every move Rayner was making, every word he'd spoken, had already fallen under the view of something colder than any lens: the truth. Boone stayed still, his chin lifted slightly, eyes hardened like stone beneath the floodlight. He didn't raise his shoulders or speak again, yet the weight around him thickened, as if gravity itself took sides. But Rayner mistook it for surrender. He grinned with half his mouth, wrist twitching as though he'd just pulled off a triumphant maneuver in front of a camera, one he believed wasn't even there. Rayner took another step, his eyes twitching like an overstretched wire, his voice tight with challenge. "You think just because you're big the law has to bend to you?" Without waiting for a response, he suddenly swung his hand. The plastic bag flew from his palm, not dropped on the ground, not shoved onto the seat, thrown directly into Boone's chest. The sound was small, not loud, but the way it slowly hit the sidewalk between them was like a verdict tossed into the street without a trial. About 10 meters away, behind a lamppost, the delivery worker had not ended his live stream. His hands shook at the sight of the throw, but the camera held its frame. The chat lit up with the first lines, short but sharper than any evening headline. "Don't turn it off. He's trying to plant something. That's a criminal in uniform. Zoom in on his face. Rewind to when he threw that bag." The comments poured in, one after another, like needles piercing the image on screen. Though the live stream did not yet have many viewers, a few well-known activist accounts had begun sharing the link. This network was not as fast as a siren, but wide enough to turn a buried event into a media spotlight if pushed in the right direction. Boone still didn't move. The plastic bag lay right at his feet, like a question waiting for the wrong answer to set everything off. But he didn't bend down. His eyes stayed fixed on Reiner's face, not with anger, but with the calm of someone who had crossed his tolerance limit a long time ago. "Go on," Boone said, his voice nearly a whisper, but clear enough to blur out the passing traffic. "Whatever else you've got, now's the time." Rainer jerked his head slightly, uncertain whether he was rattled or thrilled by Boone's silence. He turned to his radio, muttering a few support codes, but subtly glanced at the plastic bag on the ground, as if worried the very thing he threw might ruin his setup. He didn't notice the red recording light still blinking on the phone mounted by the lamppost. He didn't see the cameraman stepping back, both for safety and to widen the frame. Comments kept spilling like blood from a deep cut. Some accounts began recognizing Boone's face, the one mentioned in internal reports about procedural misconduct reviews. Posts like, "That's Boone, the guy who investigated Officer West," and "He's the one who reported racial bias in last year's patrol unit," started circulating. Boone's silence was no longer just personal restraint. It became an unspoken accusation, needing no raised voice, no slammed fist, only his presence beneath amber lights, headlight beams, and a blinking live stream screen. The night was quiet, the street still, but a confrontation had begun to leave its mark, not with bullets, but with every word now flooding the comment feed. Rainer glanced to his left, catching the flickering reflection from the back of a phone. A figure appeared behind the utility pole, arm raised, half his face showing beneath the edge of a hood. Rainer blinked, then moved. Without another word to Boone, he turned fully, striding toward the person filming, with an attitude no longer resembling an officer on duty, but more like someone punishing a saboteur of his own game. Every footfall seemed to crush the heartbeat of the person behind the lens. "You dare record me without permission, you idiot!" Rainer roared, his shout echoing across the late-night street, thickening the air. Without waiting for a response, he yanked the phone from the delivery driver's hand, so roughly that it tumbled from the stabilizer and clattered onto the cement with a sharp, hollow noise. The screen flashed once, then went dark in Rainer's hand. He didn't check it, or try to see how long the video had recorded. He simply stuffed it into his uniform pocket and spun back around, eyes blazing. The delivery driver backed away 2 steps, sweat beading down his neck. He panted, not daring to speak. The lines on his forehead showed both rage and fear, a fear he knew well from stories he had heard, now transformed into his reality. But rather than plead, he snatched up his keys and raced down the street. His hood fell behind and he disappeared into the shadows, shoes clattering a frantic rhythm, like an unprepared witness fleeing the scene. Rainer watched, but did not give chase. He paused for a few seconds, then turned to the Lincoln, where Boone remained motionless as stone. Rainer muttered a curse, confusion and agitation clear in his eyes. He had no idea where that phone might have sent its recording or whether anyone else had witnessed what just happened. But he knew this: if any of it leaked, his entire setup could collapse because of one nobody. And that was already happening. The phone, just before it was snatched away, had automatically backed up the footage to iCloud. In less than a minute, the clip was secure in a shared account with a public link. As he sprinted down the dark street, the phone's owner managed to send the link to a group chat with a single line: "Cop planting drugs. Save if you see." No accents, just the essentials, enough for several group members to open it, skip to the end, and start sharing. At the scene, Boone said nothing. His silence was not hesitation, but observation. He had watched Rayner snatch the phone, heard the shout, and recognized something most would miss. This officer was not acting by any rulebook. He manipulated each step as if the entire arena had been prepared for Boone to stumble into. Yet Boone had been through too many battles to miss a slip. Rayner's real mistake was not the plastic bag, but his panic. When the powerful lose control, their armor shreds all at once. Boone glanced to the right, where Rayner was storming back, his uniform pocket bulging with every breath. Rayner didn't know what was coming, but Boone did. The wind had changed, and this time justice wouldn't come from the command of a man with a gun. Rayner returned as if he had never lost control. He moved quickly, his right hand extended in front as if to end the act with a decisive gesture. Boone had no time to react before his whole body was slammed hard against the side of the car. His muscular frame did not resist, but the calm bulk of him tensed with each beat. Survival instinct at work. Boone kept his breathing steady, but his eyes moved to the side, watching Rayner and the window's reflection. Rayner's hand locked tightly around Boone's left wrist, then suddenly twisted it upward, pinning it against his back and pressing his head near the cold, glossy car paint. Boone's eyes did not close, nor did they burn with anger. He just spoke, deep, clip, his tone oddly calm in the heated air. "You just made a big mistake." Rayner did not answer, only pressed harder, his sweaty grip making the veins in Boone's wrist stand out. But those words echoed in his mind like a silent counterpunch. He had once heard that kind of response from a senior soldier back when he was a rookie. Steady, never begging, as if waiting for the inevitable backlash. It made him hesitate a split second, but he brushed it off, pretending he was still in charge. Boone's head was pressed sideways, but his gaze was not lost. He looked through the glass, where a red light blinked steadily like the heartbeat of truth. The dashcam, mounted at the center of the windshield, automatically recording every moment, every frame already transmitted. Every 6 seconds, Boone's specialized dashcam was set to upload a short clip to an encrypted central database, a feature known only to agents in the Federal Protection Program. Every move, every shout, every shove, GPS in real time was sent straight to the Department of Justice. A tiny red dot in the windshield's corner was the only signal needed, warning that everything was safe, where Rayner could not reach. No one else there knew, no one saw it, but Boone did, and Rayner did not. Rayner's grip tightened in anger, but his eyes started to flicker. Boone could feel it, like an old fighter familiar with men who charge into a fight on instinct, blind to the outcome. He let his eyes close briefly, then opened them again, as if letting a sliver of rage slip away in that short pause. Rayner panted, eyes flicking toward the car's rear, then across the road, where the delivery man had long vanished. Boone whispered, almost too low for anyone but Rayner to hear, "The problem isn't the bag, it's how you threw it." For a moment, Rayner's hand loosened. A trace of doubt, a hint of unease crept into his muscles. A misstep in an engine pushed too far. Boone remained silent, but with every second his silence grew heavier. Not submission, but waiting, a patience sharp as a blade. Everything Rayner had just done, he thought it was the end. But in fact, it was just the start of the recording that would bring him into the light. Inside the patrol car, Rayner reached for the radio, his voice clipped and mechanical, as if reciting a technical checklist rather than reporting an arrest. "Central, this is Delta 6, license plate G2214, Lincoln Navigator, black male, one subject." He paused for a beat, his eyes flicking to the plastic bag resting casually on the passenger seat. Not a word was mentioned about it. No suspected narcotics evidence, no suspected trafficking, not even evidence recovered at the scene. Just silence, sliding through like a knife, cold, thin, hidden in his sleeve. "Requesting a backup vehicle transporting to the station now. No resistance." He cut the signal. Boone was handcuffed immediately after Rayner finished the announcement. He did not resist. When the patrol car door closed, his back pressed against the hard seat and his gaze stayed fixed just slightly to the left, where the window of his car was now the only thing left at the scene, witness to the chaos he could not stop. The patrol car sped off into the night. Just a seemingly harmless cutaway, but in Boone's mind, every passing second was a test of conscience that Rayner had already failed from the very first minute. At headquarters, the gate opened slowly. 2 young officers in blue uniforms stood watch, but showed no suspicion. One opened the back door of the patrol car, lowered his head to look at Boone, but said nothing. Boone stepped out. His posture remained steady, spine straight, as if he had never been forced to the ground in public. He did not meet anyone's eyes, but every measured, cold gesture drew a sideways glance. Boone did not need to look dangerous, he just needed to exist. Reiner led him into a small room, separate from the usual holding area, called a Level 2 Security Observation Room, a term that sounded by the book but was typically used for cases needing information control. "Sit down," Reiner ordered, pointing at a wooden chair bolted to the floor. Boone complied. The case file appeared immediately on the screen of Reiner's internal computer. Under the preliminary charges column, the line read, "Possession of a controlled substance with intent, suspected gang affiliation." Rayner typed quickly, fingers heavy on the keyboard as if hammering accusations into the official record. That plastic bag was never entered into the evidence protocol. It simply appeared, then suddenly became the sole basis for a conclusion, without supporting evidence, without any chain of custody. Boone glanced at the timestamp in the screen's corner, 2:18 a.m., a memorable hour because within minutes, the Dashcam's data sequence would finish syncing to the central platform, triggering an emergency report code, the code that would email a fixed list, Department of Justice representatives, federal attorneys, and an internal affairs contact Boone had worked with before. Raynard stood up. "Stay right here. I'll handle the rest." He closed the door, unaware that inside this room, the place he thought safest to manipulate a vulnerable man, everything he did was being synchronized, from the string of accusations to the gap between discovery and willful failure to report. Boone stared at the white wall. He had trained hundreds in the field, lectured on standard procedures at state conferences. Now he was the variable the system wanted to eliminate. But he knew this. With each of Rayner's missteps, the system was no longer a solid block. It was a crumbling machine, waiting for the right recording to bring it down. In the intake room, harsh white light bared everything above the paperwork, but revealed nothing of what happened below. Marla Greaves was entering data for a stolen car when her screen switched to new admissions. The first name, Elric Boone. She paused. Her eyes didn't deceive her. That name had appeared in thick internal files she'd processed. Reports of discriminatory conduct, quiet audits, and a list of those with federal Level 2 data access. She typed a key combination to review his personnel record. As expected, the photo was of a muscular man, a former independent case coordinator for the Department of Justice, someone who'd stood in courtrooms to verify wrongdoing by badge holders. Marla looked up through the side window. Boone sat quietly in the temporary holding room, the internal camera's light on his brow. His posture was not defiant, nor that of a smuggler. It was the posture of someone long used to such rooms, but never from the accused's side. She turned to Rayner, her voice low. "This man, he's got a federal code. I think you should notify higher-ups before entering any charges." Rayner waved her off, like shooing a mosquito. He didn't look at the screen or bother with more questions. "We process everyone the same, black or not, what rights," he said, his tone unchanged, as if the phrase were boilerplate from the manual. Marla didn't respond, but her hands stilled on the keys. Her breath grew heavy, as if she'd inhaled invisible smoke clamping her chest. The system she'd thought cleansed by ethics checks 3 years ago now stood in front of her, alive, in uniform, reading out names as if tallying warehouse stock. Outside, a door slammed. A staff member entered with another evidence checklist, but Rayner refused to let Boone sign anything. All evidence was logged solely by the arresting officer. No scene photos, no DTNE signatures, no fingerprint checks. In the system, every step was being wrapped up to push the case straight to prosecution. Marla kept staring at the screen. Her login would auto-lock after 3 minutes of inactivity. She didn't know if she should keep working or leave her station. In her head rang a faint sound, not a call, not an alarm, but the words Boone had spoken to the camera. "You just made a big mistake." That line cut through the system's emotionless interface, reminding her that files entered at the wrong time could become evidence that could never be withdrawn. She still hadn't decided what to do, but tonight, something had begun to crack. From the moment Boone walked into headquarters with the calm look that no one there could hold for more than 3 seconds, the holding room was as stifling as a metal vault, the 4 grayish-white walls marked with chips and cracks from years of pent-up anger. Boone sat upright on a backless metal chair, red marks still visible around his wrists from the handcuffs. He stared at the tabletop, not searching for a way out, but calculating each move in reverse. His name, his profession, and the entire system he once helped build, all of it remained neatly ordered in his mind, cold and precise like a field map he used to study years ago. When the steel door clanged 3 short times, a young officer entered, holding a file folder and wearing headphones askew. The officer recited the details collected that evening, his expression detached, as if handling just another routine incident. Boone did not look at him, only asked evenly, "I have the right to request the extraction of data from my personal vehicle's dashcam. The policy has been in place since April, under the agreement signed by the Department of the Interior and the Federal Department of Justice." The officer looked up, clearly unprepared for this request. He hesitated, glanced at the file again, then left the room without replying. Less than 10 minutes later, someone else arrived, dressed in technical gear, collar stained with sweat, carrying a backpack, carrying a laptop and external drives. His name was Grady, the night shift technician, rarely involved in such cases, but the order was clear. Retrieve dashcam footage, Lincoln, license plate GE2214, priority internal code. Boone stayed still as Grady powered up, connected the drives, and began extracting the video. The clip appeared on the monitor with 3 views: the front, the cabin, and the left side angle. All streams were synchronized in real time. Boone nodded slightly, voice steady. "Start from when the car left the gym. Slow down when I'm ordered to pull over." Grady asked nothing further, fingers sliding the cursor back to the frame where the red patrol lights glowed against the car's rear. The police loudspeaker in the video echoed, "Black Lincoln, license plate GE2214, pull over to the right." Everything matched Boone's memory. They kept watching. Grady increased the brightness on the cabin camera, adjusting contrast to clarify the passenger seat. At this point, Boone was outside the car, the patrol headlights slicing through the front windshield, casting his shadow long across the pavement. The screen showed Rayner approaching from the left, standing close to the window, mouthing words that weren't picked up by audio. Grady glanced at Boone, then slowed the playback. As the glare from the flashlight blurred the image, Boone caught something odd at the edge of the frame. Rayner's left hand brushing the door and sliding over the passenger seat area. Boone said nothing, his eyes glued to the replay, waiting for something to break open from the memory preserved by the camera. The video kept rolling, and no one in the room was speaking. Each slow-motion second ticked by like a warning beat building toward a revelation, and for the first time during his monotonous night shift, Grady felt his hands go cold, even as the air conditioning hummed steadily. In the tech room, washed in cool blue light, Boone and Grady kept their eyes fixed on the screen, as if the whole weight of the room pressed on that single video. The footage slowed at the 403rd second, where Officer Kip Rayner's left hand reached into the passenger seat area. Boone leaned in, eyes narrowing with the instinct of someone who had spent hundreds of hours in internal affairs review. The image became painfully clear. Rayner dropped a foreign object, a small, milky nylon bag, down beside the document box next to the seat. Grady breathed out, not looking at Boone as he pressed the button to save a copy. The glow from the monitor cast sharp lines on his face, each muscle standing out like guilt etched in relief. He wasn't personally involved, but in that moment, Grady knew he'd witnessed something far greater than his overnight shift. Heels sounded in the hallway. Marla Greaves entered, holding a fresh case file and a cup of cold coffee. She glanced at the men, then focused on the screen, just as the video showed Rayner's hand withdrawing empty from the passenger compartment, as if nothing had happened. She didn't speak for a few seconds, scanning the footage again. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy, stripped of the formal tone she used for street offenders. "It's just threw his badge in the trash," Marla said, not needing to stress any word, because each one broke the backbone of the man in question. Boone turned toward her, giving a small nod. In his eyes there was no anger, just recognition, as if he had always expected this ending, only not that it would come from the very tool he had trusted to protect justice. Grady forwarded the video to the internal system, then made a compressed copy for the Federal Legal Division. No one instructed him to do so, but he did it anyway, because if anything from this shift was worth preserving, it was the moment truth overcame power. Marla stood silently, eyes never leaving Boone. "Do you want me to report this to the inspector right now?" she asked. Boone shook his head slowly, then glanced up at the ceiling camera. "No need. Just make sure that the video is never altered. From now on, every step must leave a trace. I won't let anyone in this station say, 'I didn't know.'" Outside, dawn was near, but in that room the only light came from a frozen video frame where a man had put his career in his hands, then let it drop. Not as evidence, but as forgery. From that moment on, the story no longer belonged to power or the uniform, but to the camera, the truth, and to whoever had chosen silence just long enough for the right voice to be heard. On the 6th floor of the Southern District Department of Justice headquarters, a new file popped up at the top of the priority list, tagged Emergency, Red Zone. The system automatically marked it as one of the 3 highest severity files in the past 3 months. It was the original Dashcam copy from Elric Boone, pulled from a synced cluster before the vehicle was impounded. The link came with a brief note: "Suspected severe procedural violation, urgent response required." No more words were needed. The classification code alone was enough to make the entire internal affairs team stop what they were doing and open it immediately. When the video loaded its first frame, the room, normally cold, seemed to grow heavier by a few degrees. Rayner appeared crystal clear, a cold face, precise movements, left hand sliding in beside the passenger seat, dropping a small object shielded by the car's shadow. No one spoke. They stared at the screen as if facing a man whose final mask had just been torn away. A young staffer blurted out, "We have a major process violation here, and he knows exactly what he's doing." Boone sat upright in the holding room, the overhead lights dull on shoulders still tense as unpolished stone. In front of him was a cold metal table. To the left, a hidden camera blinked red, recording. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't look up at anyone coming or going. Only once, very slowly, did Boone turn and face the corner camera, speaking just loud enough for the microphone to catch every word. "Now, let's see who gets to write the ending." There was no challenge, no plea, only a message, as if he had known the game was rigged from the start, and chose to sit quietly while waiting for the order to be set right. Within 40 minutes after the Dashcam video was flagged as urgent, it cleared 3 layers of internal review and was sent to the Washington Command System. There, a group of 6 with special access, names rarely listed, opened the attached case file. Boone was not an unfamiliar name. His background, past investigations, every federal special operation where he had been summoned as a coordinator, all of it was there. But what made them pause the longest was a handwritten report by Rayner, attached to the video Boone's case triggered within the department's security system. A command was pressed next. On the internal interface, Kip Rayner's profile appeared. The initial AI system assessment, comparing timeline, statement, suspicious behavior, dashcam footage, and field conduct patterns, gave a preliminary conclusion. High probability of evidence fabrication. The case status bar turned red. A priority for comprehensive investigation label appeared right beside his name, with a response deadline set at under 12 hours. At the Eastern District Investigative Bureau office, an overnight clerk received orders to reopen Rayner's old internal surveillance file. In a cross-record, 3 years earlier, an employee had noted that Rayner showed signs of racial bias during patrol. However, the case was set aside for lack of evidence. Internal note: observe further if repeated. That comment now served as proof of a system that once avoided inconvenient truths. As data streams continued syncing, Boone remained seated. With each passing minute, he spoke less, but no one dared take their eyes off him. His silence felt like a boulder about to roll, requiring neither warning nor gesture. From outside the holding room, Officer Marla passed by, glancing through the glass slit. She saw in Boone's eyes that he needed no defense. He needed truth to speak. Upstairs, a crisis meeting was called at 2:15 a.m. The chairperson said little, simply played the video, presented the comparison report, then concluded, "This is no longer a misconduct issue. This is fabrication of evidence for racial discrimination. The investigation shifted from individual wrongdoing to systemic failure." In Central Washington, a pre-drafted email was sent. The subject line in all caps, "Request for explanation from Jefferson County Police Department, the Boone case." At the same time, in an office a few districts away, Kip Rayner struggled with a handwritten report. Though protocol suggested using the electronic system, he wrote each line by hand, deliberately creating a gap between actual behavior and recorded data. He entered a timestamp 3 minutes behind the real stop. In the description, he wrote, "Saw suspected narcotics on the front floor near the gearshift." The wording was cautious, crafted to obscure intent, but not so perfect as to arouse suspicion. On the desk, his phone vibrated with a notification from the internal tracking system, signaling that the Lincoln Dashcam footage had finished uploading. But Rayner ignored it. Like so many times before, he assumed data from personal vehicles would be stopped by technical checks. Or, at the very least, no one would review it unless a direct request was made. He sat tapping his pen on the table, eyes scanning the report as if revising a script for a legitimized arrest. He had no idea that at that very moment, his video was on the desks of 3 senior inspectors, and a special investigative unit had started the process of cross-verification. No announcements, no calls, no warning. When the truth is too clear to deny, the process doesn't begin with suspicion, it begins with confirmation. What was happening now was the harshest confirmation for someone who believed no one would notice a little manipulation in the middle of the night. Rayner folded the report, tore off the lower edge to avoid identification by photocopy code, and stood, heading for the records room. He planned to file it in internal processing, delaying submission by a few more hours. But before he could touch the door, an alert sounded at the clerk's desk behind him. "Rayner, someone from Internal Affairs wants to see you. It's urgent, they're already here." He turned, a flicker of slow realization in his eyes. He didn't know yet. He didn't know his next steps would lead straight to a dead end. He didn't know the victim's camera had just written the final act of his dirty play. And he didn't know every line of that handwritten report would now be evidence against him, one line at a time. At office number 42 of the Washington Internal Affairs Unit, the desk lamp had not been switched off for 4 straight hours. A technician named Alondra pulled her chair closer, fingers gliding across the keyboard, eyes fixed on the expanding data on her screen. Kip Rayner's name stood out at the top of the page. District-level officer, Jefferson Precinct, active from 2014 to present. Below the summary was a list of closed internal case files marked "not processed" due to lack of evidence. 3 civil lawsuits. The plaintiffs' names were redacted by policy, but the content was unmistakable. One accused Rayner of abuse of power during a roadside stop, causing injury during a search. The second claimed to have been framed, but the evidence vanished from the property room before the hearing. The third, the most severe, involved verbal intimidation with racial undertones. All 3, according to notes beside each, were dismissed for unconvincing evidence, inconsistent witnesses. Alondra read these lines not as paperwork, but as a map of collusion. 4 internal complaints, with the same lack of evidence conclusion, matched too closely to be a mere coincidence. She scrolled to the section of unclassified audio, clicking on a folder labeled 2019_KR_transit. The file had just been decrypted from the old archive. When it opened, Rayner's voice came through clearly, despite a slight static, recorded on a collar mic during a patrol 6 years ago. He was speaking to a colleague, voice quiet but every word tinged with an unmistakable edge. "I just think they were born to be checked more thoroughly. That's all there is to it. If you don't dig deep, they'll hide it better." The room fell silent. Alondra glanced at the supervisor behind her. He nodded, then wrote in the main log. Recording from 2019 confirms systemic racial bias. Behavior is repeated, not an isolated incident. Red letters appeared next to Rayner's name. Suspected intentional racial discrimination. Meanwhile, at Jefferson, Rayner was still filling out his report, unaware that at headquarters, his entire past behavior was being reconstructed in the worst possible light. Audio clips, paused files, overlooked paperwork, all were now joined together into a complete picture, leaving out no piece. At the same time, Officer Marla left the holding room, delivering a freshly printed file to the intake desk. On the cover, it read, "Request for isolation and temporary suspension. Subject, Kip Rayner." She did not read it aloud or discuss it, merely placed it down like a verdict waiting for announcement. In the quiet room where Boone sat, the light stayed on. He kept the same posture, not bowing his head, not asking the time. He did not need to know the hour, for he understood this much. When justice starts moving, it is not measured in minutes, but by the weight of truth. And this time, that truth pressed hard on the man who once thought he could always slip away from every charge. The data summary was being printed. One copy for the Inspector General, one for the Public Affairs Bureau, and the last sent straight to the precinct where Rayner still sat. 3 stamps would mark them, all identical, no extra note needed. Eligible for prosecution. Boone was not released immediately, but at this very moment, the balance had shifted. Every footstep in the station's hallway now spoke for the truth he had waited to speak for him. Data from past incidents was arranged by the Justice Department team into a coded summary flagged in deep yellow. Among them, 3 names of those arrested for possession stood out, forming a pattern traced by a familiar hand. The arrest dates, stretched from 2017 to 2022, spread across the eastern suburbs of Georgia, but the methods were almost identical. A police officer stopped a car mid-road, cited suspicious driving, then found drugs in the passenger area or trunk. The cross-check with temporary data showed that the arresting officer for all 3 victims was Kip Rayner. In the initial reports, each case noted minor resistance or non-cooperative from the start, enough to justify a search. However, the anomaly became clearer when the investigative team discovered all 3 men had stable professional backgrounds. 2 were former middle school teachers, 1 worked in logistics, and none had any criminal record. The only charge that led to their sentences was possession of a small amount of a controlled substance, enough for a sentence of 2 to 6 years, but not enough to require surveillance cameras in the station without a specific complaint. The first man was contacted through legal representation. The second refused any contact due to psychological reasons. He had spent 2 years in detention and had lost all trust in any system. The third was still serving his sentence at a southern detention center and was the only one willing to answer the inspector's questions. The call was made under supervision, recorded clearly, and was only allowed to last 12 minutes. When the investigator asked, "Do you remember the officer who arrested you in 2020? The man on the other end did not answer immediately. A heavy sigh echoed through the headphones. Then his voice rose slowly, not angry, but exhausted. "Now, I am no longer seen as paranoid." He said that he had insisted in court that he was framed, but the assigned public defender only shook his head, warning that if he maintained that claim, his mental health records could be turned against him. He described going on a 3-day hunger strike in jail because he felt betrayed by those trained to uphold justice. No one believed him then. Now, as the investigators asked again, his voice was faint as dust. "The worst pain is not losing your freedom, but seeing your loved ones look at you like you're a skilled liar." The team coordinator recorded the whole story and immediately linked this file to the damage assessment data caused by prolonged misconduct. A new note was added to the emergency section, possible criminal liability for the local agency for facilitating the cover-up of evidence from previous complaints. On the 8th floor of the coordination building, a new list was being compiled, victims eligible for retrial. Boone's name was at the end of that list, but specially flagged, because thanks to his Dashcam, the entire domino chain of lies began to collapse. And now the system had to face itself, something those men had begged for, screamed for, but had never been heard, until The Rock didn't have to speak loudly, letting the camera speak instead. Under the cold fluorescent lights of the internal data review room, Boone's dashcam video played in full detail. Every movement, every sound, and each GPS coordinate was extracted by the system without missing a second. From the moment Boone pulled over on command to when Kip Rayner approached, actions that once seemed inconspicuous now unfolded as a wordless indictment. Justice Department monitors sat in a row, pausing, rewinding and tagging critical timestamps. Images of Rayner opening the car door, bending inside, his left hand reaching out of sight, his eyes darting around with no stated reason for a search. Every moment was shown, irrefutable. A large monitor, connected to a secure display system, streamed the footage to the Federal Bureau of Investigation headquarters in Washington. Federal Attorney Leora Mendez was the first to speak after 5 full minutes of silence. This is systematic evidence fabrication, not an isolated incident. We can no longer call this an individual's error. Her voice was soft, but each word weighed heavily in the room. A young investigator beside her nodded, scribbling in the report, "Elevate Rayner's file priority." Meanwhile, in a separate meeting room, representatives of the Internal Affairs Office and the Special Review Task Force were summoned for an emergency session. The dashcam data was more than a video. It included GPS data, proving Boone had made no suspicious maneuvers before the stop. His entire route matched the usual schedule of a government employee returning home in the city's eastern neighborhoods, with no violations recorded before the stop was ordered. A digital map was projected, marking each stop, every turn Boone's car had made. This information would be added to the defense file and forwarded to prosecutors as proof that Rayner's approach was entirely arbitrary and intentional. Within less than 48 hours after the dashcam footage was reviewed, Boone's case was suspended as a criminal investigation. An internal memo ordered all involved personnel to withhold any details pending an official ruling, but meanwhile a list of victims arrested by Rayner over the past 5 years had been sent to a special inspector for comprehensive review. Any case showing similar patterns would be reopened as potential organized criminal misconduct. At a deeper level, a secret meeting took place between 2 senior officials at the department. One picked up Boone's file, glancing over his background, former internal affairs, advisor to police oversight reform projects. The other side, "We should have known from the start. Boone is not someone who stays quiet. He knows when to wait." A brief silence passed, then both nodded as if signing an invisible verdict. This would not end quietly. That dashcam, instead of being mere evidence in a wrongful arrest, had become a ticking bomb in the hands of a system that once believed itself untouchable. The Justice Department's press room was brightly lit in the middle of the night, every seat packed with reporters, microphones raised like a forest. The sounds of typing, camera shutters clicking, and the tension in the air all showed this was no longer just an administrative error. When the official spokesperson stepped to the podium, before a backdrop bearing the department's logo and the national flag, no one was looking at their phone. "At 19:30 Washington time," she began, her tone strangely calm, "we confirmed that the person arrested on charges of illegal possession of controlled substances is Elric Boone, a federal investigator conducting internal oversight in the eastern region." Each sentence cut through the web of falsehoods surrounding the case like a blade. Some reporters gasped, some still did not grasp the gravity of the situation. But the next part was the real blow. "We have received sufficient evidence from the dashcam owned by Mr. Boone showing that the act of placing illegal objects in the vehicle was committed by a local officer. All subsequent arrest procedures violated citizen inspection statutes in the absence of legitimate traffic grounds." In the third row, a veteran journalist who had covered many internal investigations smirked, knowing exactly what was coming. Outside the press room, a document was simultaneously sent to every police station in the state where Rayner was employed. Immediate suspension, no access to records, along with a summons from the federal court requiring Rayner to appear the following morning to answer charges of evidence fabrication, obstruction of justice, and professional professional misconduct. At the local police headquarters, Rayner was at his desk finishing his final report when he was called to the command room. Two senior officers said little, handing him the official notice with a digital signature from Washington. His first reaction was shock. Then his face reddened as he read the phrase, "conduct potentially constituting a federal crime." He glanced around, searching for an escape, but there was no one left to cover for him. Everything had been recorded, reviewed, and confirmed at the highest level. A second notice was posted publicly on the station's bulletin board, as required for transparency. Kip Rayner, suspended without pay, temporarily barred from internal documents, work equipment, and personal data related to the incident. Each line fell like a hammer on the image he had tried to keep clean. Officers who once avoided his gaze now passed by without bowing their heads. Back at headquarters, Elric Boone was escorted out of the holding room, walking down an empty hallway where only the echo of shoes struck the tile. He looked at no one, said nothing, but the person beside him, a federal oversight agent, spoke softly, affirming a truth Boone did not need to hear again. "Now they know who you are, and this time they can't bury you under any label." That night, major news outlets all covered the wrongful arrest and the shocking dashcam video. Comments flooded in, from outrage to disbelief, not because a cop was suspended, but because the truth, so shamelessly twisted, was exposed by technology and a man who would not bow. And this time, The Rock's first strike needed no fists, just the right look, and a recording that could not be erased. The interrogation room hallway lay deep in the basement of the headquarters, where the walls were heavily soundproofed and cameras discreetly positioned to catch every movement. Kip Rayner sat alone in the cold white room, facing three men in white shirts, the federal investigation team, each holding case files twice as thick as any criminal law book. He neither questioned why he was there, nor showed surprise. Rayner's face was expressionless, his pale gray eyes nearly cold as he stated, "I followed proper procedure." No one responded. One investigator began by listing timestamps pulled from the dashcam footage. From the 13th second to the 35th second, the footage clearly showed Rayner's left hand entering the vehicle through the open door, his right hand holding the door latch. Then came the moment he withdrew his hand without inspecting the driver's seat or the rear luggage compartment, an action any valid vehicle inspection would require. "Where did this package come from?" an investigator asked, pointing to a close-up photo of a nylon package cropped from the video, edges and folds sharply printed. Rayner glanced at the photo, then looked up, his face still devoid of any tremor. "I picked it up off the floor. Maybe someone dropped it earlier. I don't remember whose it was." The room fell silent for 3 seconds. No one laughed or took notes. The brazenness and numbness in his tone thickened the air. The third investigator, a middle-aged woman with a steady, clock-like voice, closed the file and placed it on the table. "You say you don't remember whose it was, but why does the dashcam show you looking around, lowering your shoulders, then placing your left hand precisely at the passenger seat footwell, the blind spot of the rearview mirror known only to the vehicle owner or experienced individuals?" Rayner kept his expression unchanged. "I saw the package, so I had to check. I followed my professional instinct." He paused, then, as if to pour more fuel on the fire, spoke slowly. "It's not my fault if a person of color is found with drugs." The second investigator lifted her head. "That last statement, do you confirm you're speaking as a representative of the force?" Rayner answered without hesitation. "As a law enforcement officer with more than 10 years of service, I believe I have the right to make that statement." "We also believe in rights," the female investigator replied, sliding a stack of papers toward Rayner. "And here is the search warrant for your files. All official emails, phone records, data access logs, and supervision files from cases you've participated in over the past 6 years. All documents will be digitized, stored in a top-secret surveillance system, and you will have no access to any accounts from this moment forward." Rayner stared at the papers, neither touching nor picking them up. "I know how you work," he said, his voice no longer arrogant but hoarse. "Turning things over, smearing, tearing apart every detail to build a charge, but I still believe in what I did." The female investigator smiled, a cold smile that made all his defenses crumble. "The thing is, this time we're not making anything up. The camera has done it for us." Outside, the legal team's office was already preparing files for a federal prosecution. Meanwhile, as Rayner sat motionless in that room, the video continued spreading to partner agencies, each frame stored in multiple data systems under red alert status. Every click on the image of that hand was evidence he could never retract. Boone entered the interrogation room with a calm demeanor, shoulders squared, his gaze unwavering. The overhead lights carved his features into stone, justifying the nickname many in the field still used, The Rock. Opposite him, Rayner sat with his hand resting loosely on the table, his defense attorney in a light gray suit at his side, lips pressed tight, as if ready to interject at any moment. No one spoke at first, no introductions were needed. Everyone present knew precisely why they were there. The lead investigator played the tape, fast-forwarding to the crucial moment and freezing the frame at the instant Rayner's left hand slipped inside Boone's car. "We require confirmation from both parties," he announced. "Every answer will be recorded and transcribed on site." Boone didn't look at the screen, his eyes fixed on Rayner. His voice rang out steadily, every word measured. "You don't need to remember. The camera remembers for you." The stillness in his delivery made everyone in the room pause, pens suspended in midair. There was no anger, no outrage, but a weight heavy enough to crush the heart of anyone trying to deny it. Rayner's lawyer leaned forward, interrupting. "We request a temporary halt to the video analysis and intend to file a motion regarding procedural errors in data collection. There is a possibility the footage was extracted in violation of federal encryption protocols." A quiet tap sounded from the chief investigator. "Request denied," he stated. The clip was extracted directly from a Dashcam under the Department of Justice using AES 256 encryption, stored on federal servers by Decree No. 1, 2024. All data has verified digital signatures, GPS, internal clock stamps, and vehicle owner ID. The device cannot be tampered with or edited in post-production. The attorney began to object again, but Boone turned to him, silencing the comment with a look. "You can review it 4 times, 10 times, 20 times if you want," Boone said. "Each time it will be the same frame, the same hand, the same act. The only thing that changes is the excuse you come up with." The atmosphere in the room grew denser. The investigator continued showing additional clips, Rayner failing to report the drugs over the radio, altering the timestamp on the report, and finally, the moment Rayner slapped the plastic bag against Boone's chest in front of a roadside witness's camera. All of it pieced together, presenting a sequence of deliberate actions that could not be explained away as mistakes or job stress. "We are not just prosecuting an act," the investigator concluded. "We are prosecuting the entire pattern of abuse you are a part of, and today, the first period has been put in place." Boone stood when told he could leave. Before exiting, he paused by Rayner's shoulder, not stooping, not offering a farewell, but leaving just one final sentence. "Don't look at me. Look at the shadow you leave in this system." When the door closed behind him, only Rayner and his lawyer remained, with the monitor still aglow, paused at the 30-second mark, the night's light illuminating the gloved hand as it withdrew from the car, as if nothing had happened. But this time, it had all been captured. There was no way back. The stage lights glinted off the rows of dark wooden benches where a crowd of reporters sat with recorders, cameras, and notebooks resting on their knees. The nameplate on the large dais read, "Federal Committee on Abuse of Power in Law Enforcement, Expanded Hearing." The media called it the Dashcam case of the century, not because the footage was long or had special effects, but because it exposed a form of power manipulation that had survived far too long in the shadow. Elric Boone sat in the 3rd row, back straight, hands clasped in front of his chest, his gaze frozen amid the hush. He had nothing more to say. The footage had spoken for him. Everyone in the room knew the man once escorted away in the night had broken no law. He had only stood in the wrong place when a police officer chose the wrong person to play a power game against. At the witness stand, an older man with salt and pepper hair was called forward. The hearing moderator's voice came through the speakers. "Civilian witness, formerly the defendant in a November 2018 arrest documented by Kip Rayner." The man cleared his throat, clutching a crumpled crumpled sheet without looking at it. He spoke slowly. "I have waited more than 5 years to see this light." The room went quiet, as if everyone had been gripped by that line. "I once said I was framed. I told my family, the press, even the guards. Everyone thought I was paranoid. No one believed a bag of drugs could just appear in your car." He squinted at the officials' bench. "Now, I don't need anyone to believe. I just want everyone to look at that footage and ask themselves, what did I once stay silent for?" Boone tilted his head, his expression unchanged. The man continued, his voice trembling but strong. "I lost my job, my custody rights, 4 years of my life in prison because of that lie. Today, I am not asking for those years back. I just want to see for once that justice is not an empty phrase." The lead federal attorney nodded to the coordinator, then turned to the committee. "This witness is not an exception." On review, at least 3 of Rayner's arrests followed the same pattern. No witnesses, no independent cameras, but always an officer saying they just happened to find drugs. This time, the Dashcam refused to let coincidence exist. A few scattered claps rose from the back, quieted by the chairman's soft gavel. "Order in the hearing," he said. "All evidence will be presented in the proper legal sequence." The footage was replayed on the big screen, this time with subtitles and a real-time GPS map. The image of Rayner with that crooked smile, his left hand dropping an object into Boone's car, then the red light blinking from the dash cam recording every move. With each slow-motion replay, the room grew silent again, not because no one understood what was happening, but because they all understood too well. Every passing second struck at every lie ever told. Boone did not turn away from the screen. He let the blue flashing light reflect off his cheek, as if to prove that truth does not need to be shouted. It just needs to be recorded and faced head-on. And today the whole country was watching. Elric Boone walked to the witness stand, each step firm, not as if heading into a hearing, but to the end of a story he had seen coming. No one told him to rise. No one invited him to speak first, but when Boone sat, every sound in the room seemed to vanish. Even the moderator was silent, as if waiting for something they dared not name. Boone placed both hands on the table, interlacing his fingers as if holding tight to something that had just burst forth. He looked straight across at the opposing benches, his gaze neither angry nor provocative, but like a mirror reflecting a system long afraid to see itself. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I work within the system. I understand it, and I know when it's rotting from the inside." The words echoed through the mic with no need for emphasis or a gavel to mark their weight. They spread like a small crack, beginning to split the silence that had covered the justice system. No one in the room took notes, and no one turned to look at each other. All sat quietly, as if any movement might change the shape of the truth and let it slip away. Immediately after Boone's testimony, the court allowed the release of Kip Rayner's full personal and professional record. The main screen in the chamber displayed each page, from complaint reports in 2016 to internal notes in red ink. "Recommend further monitoring, tends to act alone, fails to report." Every abuse of power was listed, by year, by case number, with images from cases that had been closed for lack of independent evidence. Live streams ran on 3 platforms with over 2 million viewers at once. Comments scrolled up the side of the screen. "I know that guy. I used to live near his beat." Another read, "Why did he still get a gun after all that?" Those questions needed no answers. They were the silent indictment of a whole enabling system. A front-row reporter leaned toward the federal prosecutor and quietly asked, "What will the court do if prior cases are found fabricated?" The prosecutor did not turn but answered in a near whisper, "Reopen." The short reply landed like a promise that everything ever labeled closed would be peeled back, reassessed, and traced line by line through Rayner's old files. Boone remained seated, eyes fixed on the projection. The GPS data from his arrest appeared, showing a time discrepancy with Rayner's report. The audio was enhanced, highlighting that Rayner never read Miranda rights, never called for routine checks, and most importantly, never mentioned finding drugs over the radio. A retired senior officer on the hearing council nodded slowly, then said into the mic, "We've grown used to a few rotten trees standing in the forest, uncut, but today their roots are exposed for all to see." No applause was needed, no one stood or chanted slogans, but in that moment, the man named Boone, with hands once cuffed for doing right, shifted the entire structure of the hearing, and the whole country watched every second afterward, knowing that from this moment no one could claim "I didn't see," because now everything was plain, and the clearest truth was that a system was finally being forced to look at itself. Pip Rayner's defense attorney stood up, his shirt collar neatly adjusted, right hand holding a prepared set of notes. He approached the microphone placed at the center of the hearing room, casting a cold glance at Boone as if trying to separate the case from the real person sitting across. His voice was clear, striving to remain calm in a tension-filled atmosphere. "Your Honor, I respectfully raise a point for consideration. My client was never informed that the person being inspected was a federal agent performing official duties. Under these circumstances, he acted based on his assessment of the situation and could not foresee the special consequences tied to the other party's identity." A few people in the room nodded, mostly those who had not followed the entire case. But Boone, seated among the witnesses, did not move. He waited until the lawyer finished, then slowly tilted his head toward the microphone. His voice was calm, but each word struck at the fragile moral fiber in the room. "What if I weren't an agent? Does that give him the right to plant drugs in an innocent person's car?" The room fell silent, as if someone had just shut an airtight door. That question required no answer. It exposed a harsh truth. Rayner's actions were not wrong because he targeted an agent, but fundamentally wrong because they trampled justice, regardless of the victim's status. The attorney recoiled slightly, furrowing his brows, but remained silent. A member of the hearing panel, a former chief judge, placed her hand on the microphone and spoke evenly and coldly. "The witness's question reveals the core issue. If the law only applies when the victim holds a title, then it is no longer the law. It is a privilege wrapped in gold." The live stream continued. Outside the courthouse, the crowd grew larger, holding signs saying, "I've been stopped too. Dashcams don't lie, and justice knows no skin color." No one called for violence, but no one wanted silence either. A local reporter quietly broadcast the scene, whispering into the mic, "This is no longer just one person's story. It's a domino effect, where every silent copy of justice is being awakened." Inside the hearing room, the projector switched to a second set of evidence, scanned data from 3 older cases, matching Boone's pattern. All 3 convictions relied solely on Rayner's testimony and a package of evidence, without fingerprints. Comparing timestamps and routes, the investigation team noted Rayner regularly targeted lone people of color driving in areas with limited traffic cameras. Boone sat silently, hands still clasped. He did not rejoice in exoneration. His eyes reflected something greater, that if this story ended with just one person punished, justice would still be missing. "Let me make this clear," he spoke once more. "What needs reviewing is not a single name. It is the entire system that allowed him to exist for so long. The truth does not need embellishment, nor does it need more shouting. Its very nature is large enough to break itself open, like a small crack collapsing an entire wall that has long been hollow." Boone's question still hung in the courtroom. If I were not an agent, then what? And outside, thousands of people were asking themselves the same thing. If there were no camera, who would believe? The silence in the courtroom lasted no more than 5 seconds after Boone's answer, but it felt as if every juror had to swallow a stone. Then suddenly, one of them, a middle-aged woman with short hair, clearly a retired teacher, sprang to her feet, even though it was not her turn to speak. She raised her hand, then spoke with barely restrained anger. "The law does not distinguish by occupation. An innocent person is still innocent, whether an agent or a delivery driver. Yet now we are hearing as if status is a shield. That statement was not in the script for courtroom remarks, but none of the judges intervened, because it was the truth itself controlling the room, not the procedure. As her words faded, the evidence moved to the next piece. It was a clip from the delivery worker, a witness who managed to save the video before his phone was snatched. Taken from a live stream, unedited, uncut, the footage clearly showed Rayner standing at Boone's car door, holding a plastic bag aloft like a trophy, then turning to shout, "Black, fancy car, must be cowed." The person filming stood behind a utility pole, the orange patrol car lights flickering over the ground, but the sound was unmistakable. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, no longer just whispers but genuine reactions. Someone behind Boone ground their teeth, while the plaintiff's attorney bowed her head, fingers clenching a pen as if to snap it in half. Even the coordinating officer guarding the exit rolled his eyes, as if he could not believe those words had come from someone in uniform. A black man, driving a nice car, must have drugs, must have drugs. Rayner had spoken aloud what others kept hidden in their minds, and the camera offered no mercy. The court signaled a recess to authenticate the clip, but in truth it was for everyone to catch their breath. Yet Boone did not leave his seat. He sat upright, the light catching his nose, showing no anger, no sarcasm. His face seemed cast from the same material as his earlier words. "Let's see who writes the ending now." The tone of the trial had shifted beyond reversal. The story was no longer just Boone's or Rayner's. This was an exposure for which no excuse remained thick enough to hide. Rayner's lawyer, flustered, glanced around seeking a legal loophole, but every avenue of defense had been burned by the defendant's own words. The video from the delivery worker, a witness without bias, without stake, was the final nail in the truth. The jury began to take notes, for the first time lifting their pens as the evidence was still being presented. Lines written in silence sounded like hammers on steel. At the end of the table, a young man pressed his lips together and nodded slightly as he replayed "Black, fancy car," as if to remind himself not to forget what he had just heard. None of them were activists, yet all felt that the line between neglect and racism had been erased by a single act, and now justice had no option but to confront it. On the white background of a phone screen, the debate never seemed to end. The hashtags "Justice for Boone" and "Rayner must go" dominated the top searches for more than 12 consecutive hours, spreading from youth social networks to forums of veterans, teachers, and lawyers. Clips from the trial, especially the moment Rayner shouted, "Black, expensive car, definitely carrying something," were shared millions of times, combined with thousands of outraged captions. One group of users called for stripping Rayner of all retirement benefits, canceling his police pension as a necessary act to restore public trust in law enforcement. The other side defended him, saying he just made one mistake, that sometimes job stress pushes people past their limits. Amid these clashing opinions, a speech clip spread widely, pausing both camps for a few seconds of reflection. In it, a simply dressed man in a gray shirt, bald, with black glasses hanging from his collar, stepped up to speak at a community hearing held outside City Hall. His name was Glenn Keating, a veteran police officer with nearly 30 years of service. His voice never needed to rise, but each word landed with the weight of lead. "I have trained more than 200 recruits," he said, looking straight into the camera. "I taught them to distinguish between suspicion and prejudice. What Rayner did was not a mistake. It was a betrayal of the badge, a betrayal of the oath, a betrayal of our colleagues. He shamed the profession." No one interrupted. No coughing, no bitter laughter. Only the whirring fan above and the unmistakable silence on the faces of hundreds watching. In that moment, Glenn was not just a concerned citizen, but the voice from within, a system cracking open under the weight of actions like Rayner's. The clip was quickly picked up by major news agencies, with headlines, "When even police cannot stay silent." Many began to call it a turning point. It was no longer a case between a rogue cop and a framed agent, but a test of the conscience of an entire system, an entire society. Boone, though he made no public statement that day, still appeared in news reports, with photos showing him leaving the courthouse, gaze calm, collar damp from the rain. The Federal Disciplinary Board had received over 30,000 signatures demanding Rayner be denied any retirement rights. Some civil law organizations even filed petitions to reopen all past cases involving him, regardless of their current status. Amid this outrage, internal police circles began to leak long-suppressed frustrations. Some said Rayner had been reported for his contempt toward black women. Others said he often bragged about never leaving a trace during night patrols. No court had pronounced a verdict yet, but the public judgment had already started to fall. This time it was not impulsive but guided by facts, by witnesses, by video, and by consensus from even those who once stood beside him in uniform. If anything had become clear after those tumultuous days, it was that no one dared blindly trust the excuse of just a single bad act anymore. For the profession itself, honorable people like Glenn had spoken, "This is disgraceful and unforgivable." On the witness stand, the spotlight shone directly on Kip Rayner's pale face, each strand of sweat-soaked hair failing to hide the fear lurking behind his mask of composure. When given a chance for final remarks, he did not look at the counsel, the public, or the crowd of reporters capturing every moment, but instead stared at his own hands, hands that had once gripped the wheel, placed drugs, and shoved Boone's head into a car door. "I was just suspicious," he said, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay steady. "I did not mean to." He paused, hoping to find some sympathy in the eyes of those listening, but everyone remained motionless, as if the whole room had turned to stone the instant those words were spoken. The sentence, "I did not mean to," dropped to the floor like a pebble falling into a chasm. No echo, no response, no redemption. He swallowed hard, his lower lip twitching as if to say more, but the counsel had already nodded. "The defendant's statement is noted," came a neutral voice. Then the spotlight withdrew from him, returning its focus to the center of the room, where Elric Boone still sat in silence. Elric said nothing. He did not nod, did not retort, did not mock. He only lifted his eyes to the camera at the back of the room, streaming the trial live to hundreds of thousands. There was no hatred, no bitterness, only a resolve that could not be moved. It was the gaze of someone who had endured enough and no longer needed to persuade anyone. In that moment, the audience did not need words. They could read the message in his eyes. If at this point you still think suspicion is a reason to frame a person, what is rotten is not you, but the entire place that raised you. He stood, just as a document checker prepared to ask another question. The sound of his chair sliding back echoed softly, followed by the sharp tap of his shoes on the floor, surprisingly loud in the funereal hush. Elric said nothing more. His silence was the final declaration, stronger than any argument or evidence already presented. From the gallery, those who once hesitated or doubted the system and justice suddenly realized this trial was not about saving Boone, but about exposing how a society views black people, the police, and the word suspicion. Because suspicion had been used as a tool to justify countless acts of brutality, deaths, and wrongful convictions, and now, with a single, "I did not mean to," Rayner thought he could walk away as if the whole system would again agree to forget, just as it always had. An old national news reporter sat quietly in the back row, turned on his recorder, and spoke softly into the mic. He said he did not mean to, but when someone with weapons, authority, a uniform, and racial privilege decides to act on suspicion with no evidence, it is not a mistake, it is policy. And policy is not an accident. That recording later became the opening line in a series about the corruption of policing in America. In the hallway after the trial, Marla Greaves, the officer who had first identified Boone when entering his file, exhaled and walked slowly after Boone without invitation. "Where are you headed?" she asked. Elric looked over his shoulder and answered evenly, "Home, wash my hands and keep going." She did not ask for anything more. In her eyes, that man had remained standing through a storm that had brought so many others to their knees. Beneath the vast dome of the courtroom, light from the large window behind the judge cast a long streak across the polished wooden floor, marking a clear line between past and present. Everyone held their breath. A few spectators quietly placed their hands on their laps, fingers tapping softly as a way to stay alert during a moment when history was being etched into words. Seconds seemed to freeze, and as Judge Harper stood, an invisible wave spread through the room. In his hands was the verdict, not merely a stack of legal papers, but a bundle of keys that could either unlock or shut down the trust of a community long ignored. Rayner stood at the defendant's podium, his face stripped of its usual defiance. Though his arms remained crossed, it was no longer a defensive stance, but a way to steady himself from trembling. He knew this was a point of no return. His eyes scanned the room as if searching for an escape, not outside, but out of the truth. Yet all doors were closed, and Judge Harper's voice rang out, delivering the final blow to every excuse. Defendant Kip Rayner, you are convicted of fabricating evidence, racial discrimination in the line of duty, and obstruction of a federal investigation. The court sentences you to 16 years imprisonment with no parole for the first 8. No one moved, as if even the slightest shift would shatter the solemnity of the moment. The gavel struck once, quietly, but powerful enough to send a shiver through the room, severing the last thread between the offender and the system that once shielded him. Rayner closed his eyes, his breath shallow near his nose, then opened them. Without looking at anyone, without a word, he did not face Boone. He dared not. That look was one he had no right to give. An older police officer near the back, who once shared shifts with Rayner, gave a slight nod, a silent confirmation, not for the sentence, but for the truth. Boone rose, his gestures gentle but clear, as if the weight of the room, of the injustice, had lifted from his shoulders. He stepped away from the witness stand as the court's closing statement began. No one stopped him, no one called his name, because everything had been spoken, not in words, but through actions. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows down the courthouse steps, Boone's silhouette stretching like a moving landmark between change and the resistant past. Reporters crowded the gates, camera flashes lighting up like a storm, but Boone walked straight ahead, eyes fixed on a distant place where no one could control the truth once it was exposed. He made no statements, offered no thanks, and accepted no role as a hero. He simply walked, and with every step he sent a message. Justice does not need interpretation. It only needs to be done. At the Department of Justice office, the automated storage system finished copying the Dashcam data. A young clerk quietly typed the file name. Footage of truth. Raw version. The screen beeped softly when synchronization completed. Outside, social media platforms erupted with shares, but no one laughed or joked. The live stream video from the delivery driver had been viewed millions of times, not for sensationalism, but because everyone understood, without that camera, without Boone's timely silence, today's trial might never have happened. One user wrote, "This is when the law finally did its job, and someone endured long enough to see that moment." At the unlit parking lot behind the building, Boone stopped beside his old car, resting a hand on the hood, eyes as still as a late-season lake. A breeze brushed his jacket, carrying scents of sunlight, courtroom wood benches, and a truth just accepted, not by promise, but by a concrete verdict. He opened the door, sat behind the wheel, and started the engine without haste. No one was waiting for him at home, but it didn't matter. Today, justice had waited no longer, and for Boone, that was enough. The announcement to reopen Kip Rayner's old cases came not long after the official verdict was delivered. Previous victims who had spoken up but been ignored were now invited to resubmit their full statements, even granted the right to request representation from the Office of Civil Rights Protection. In a corner of the Department of Justice, files once closed for lack of evidence were reopened, every page no longer dormant, as if time itself had been frozen for years. Names once thought forgotten became keys to the most extensive cross-check in over a decade, directly linked to more than 60 traffic stops conducted by Rayner. At the state penitentiary, a gray-haired man stepped out through the main gate. The wind swept against the collar of his faded shirt as if urging a new rhythm, but he did not smile. 8 years is not a small number, and it is even heavier when built on the lies of someone in uniform. He looked straight at the reporters waiting outside, then paused just long enough to say, "I haven't yet relearned how to trust people." That statement was not an accusation, nor was it forgiveness. It was a clear line between trust and hatred, one that many people in those files still wrestle with every night. Boone was not present, but he followed developments from afar through the internal news system. The bruise on his wrist from the day he was arrested was still faint, a reminder of the moment the unfeeling Dashcam became a witness more valuable than any defense. He did not seek apologies or make comments. Instead, he quietly passed documents to a team of Justice Department coordinators, those just tasked with creating a new unit, the Police Conduct Oversight Task Force. This unit would not be under the command of any local police department, and its first mission was to develop a nationwide review process based on federal Dashcam data. Every patrol car, every sudden turn, every unusual stop could now be traced back in real time. The idea of independent oversight was not new, but it had never before been formalized at the legal level. Yet, after Boone's case, a petition spread rapidly on social media, collecting over 5 million signatures in just 12 days. The public dubbed it the Dash Act, a civil law proposed by the people themselves, requiring every patrol car in the country to install a triple-tiered camera system, in-car footage, cloud storage with the government, and an independent copy sent to civilian audit units. No one wanted to wait for another Boone to be framed before realizing how the system worked. That petition was later handed to a black senator whose own father had been wrongfully imprisoned in a random stop back in 1992. He did not say much during the first hearing on the bill, just rested his hand on the wooden table and looked straight into the live camera. If there aren't eyes that never sleep, many will never see the sunrise beyond these bars. The courtroom stilled, not because of grand rhetoric, but because the truth in his voice forced everyone to reconsider how justice had operated, built on fragile trust and unchecked power. Elsewhere in the city, Boone stood at his office window. The wall calendar still circled the day he was pulled over, now 9 weeks past. But the story did not end there. It began to redraw boundaries. Calls from legal groups, affected families, and former colleagues quietly expressing regret are like a small but persistent storm, pushing back against the long-standing silence in the halls of justice. When an individual dares to resist not with shouting but with evidence and composure, the entire system must adapt or dissolve from within. Boone replaced the file bag on the shelf, straightening the last note. Offline oversight unit. Priority rollout for states with high complaint rates. He granted no interviews, appeared on no nightly news, and posted nothing on social media. For him, every step now was not about securing a reputation, but ensuring that next time someone is stopped in the middle of the night, the camera is not in the hands of those who frame, but stands with those who need the truth to be seen. The federal building where Boone worked remained unchanged after everything. The nameless white walls, the carpeted halls marked with faint shoe prints from hundreds passing through every day. Boone returned to his desk as if nothing had happened. The door still opened on time, and the computer still glowed with its biometric login prompt. He did not go on television, did not give anyone a thank you statement, and did not sign his name to any op-eds sent his way. The media had once chased him in the days after the trial, but every interview request was declined. Boone did not even answer calls from the newsroom that had once partnered with him on investigative projects the year before. For Boone, silence was not about rejecting the spotlight, but the only way to ensure truth remained beneath the surface, rather than floating in someone's staged drama. One quiet weekday afternoon, his inbox pinged with a subject line, from Miles Carter. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but Boone opened it anyway. Just a few short lines. "You don't know me. I'm a second-year law student. My father is Dwight Carter, who spent 8 years in prison for a drug conviction. Thanks to your case, my father's was reopened, and yesterday he was released. Thank you, not for saving him, but for making me believe not everyone in the system stays silent." Boone closed his laptop, barely thinking, and typed a 3-lar reply. "I am not a hero. I just didn't want to be the next one framed." Then he deleted the entire thread from his inbox, leaving no trace behind. For him, the necessary action had taken place, and what remained was not pride, but simply moving forward. That afternoon, Boone received a new internal report. As always, the PDF was encrypted, requiring a fingerprint scan to open. He scrolled to the end, where anonymous complaints sat in the appendix. Unlike before, this time no one marked insufficient information or dismissed for lack of grounds. The system displayed a check mark, and the words "received, preliminary investigation underway" appeared below, all because of a single change. Now, no one had the nerve to ignore the first warning signs just because they were inconvenient. Boone's name was no longer in headline stories, but was embedded in a new awareness of what happens when the truth is neglected. At the Friday morning patrol team meeting, the squad leader announced a new rule. Any officer leaving their vehicle must activate their chest-mount body cam and sync data every 6 hours with the federal system. The first protests were cut off by looks from those who had once stayed silent. They said nothing, but as their eyes met the lens on their shirt pocket, they understood. If he was caught on tape, then I could be seen too. No one could grant themselves invisibility in a world learning to see again. Boone walked down the hallway, brushing past an old colleague, the same one who had ignored him the previous year when Boone filed his first report of misconduct. Nothing was said, but as they passed, Boone heard a long, slow exhale behind him, as if the other man had just let go of a burden carried for too long. Change does not need to be declared. It lives quietly, like the steady beat of a heart once nearly broken by silence. That evening, before leaving the office, Boone checked his inbox once more. Another letter arrived through the internal system, this time unsigned. Its content was only a single line. "For the first time in 7 years, coming to work does not make me ashamed." Boone read it, closed his laptop. He did not reply. He walked straight to the garage, unlocked his car, and slid into the driver's seat. The car was still the same old Lincoln, and the dashcam still blinked its steady red. But now, it was no longer just equipment. It was a witness. Boone started the engine, his fingers resting on the steering wheel, then lifting, setting back down as if checking himself. The window rolled halfway, letting the night air in. He looked into the rearview mirror, saw the same face, but his eyes had changed. Not because he had set someone free, but because he knew that if another day, someone else was targeted. What was seen today would not be forgotten so easily. That was all he needed. On Tuesday morning, a thick sealed envelope was delivered to Boone's office, placed neatly on his dark wooden desk. No one called ahead, and there was no sender label. When he opened it, the letter's title was printed in bold capitals: "Recommendation for Commendation, United States Department of Justice." Below was the Deputy Attorney General's signature and a formal message thanking him for his perseverance in upholding the system's integrity. Boone sat still, his eyes moving across each line without betraying emotion. The end of the letter included an invitation to attend an official event to receive the Special Justice Medal, along with legal aid funding for wrongful conviction victims. Boone read it a second time, then folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and wrote a single line on a slip of paper. "I decline. Justice does not need to be made into a medal." He did not call back, did not send a confirmation email, simply asked the office clerk to return it to the sender. He was neither angry nor sarcastic. He remained silent as always, just as he had when facing Rayner or leaving the courtroom without a word. The next morning, a familiar reporter from Capitol Insight called unexpectedly. This person had closely followed the Rayner investigation since the first week. Speaking gently over the phone, "I heard you declined the honor. Would you like to share your reason with the public to understand?" Boone replied without hesitation, "If you need a symbol, choose the Dashcam. It never bows, never compromises, never forgets to record the truth." The reporter was silent for a few seconds, then thanked him and promised to print his words unchanged. Boone needed nothing more. That afternoon, the Department of Justice held an official press conference to announce the case summary. A senior official stated, "This is an important turning point in assessing the value of digital evidence, especially data collected automatically from independent devices." National television reported it. Radio stations replayed each statement, and technology experts were invited to analyze how the department's Dashcam system had been tamper-proof because of its real-time data transmission method. They called it the first technology bodyguard in the field of civil rights protection. But outside the conference hall, across hundreds of thousands of online news streams, a headline flashed on mobile screens: Cop exposed by fellow camera. The headline was shared more than 200,000 times overnight, accompanied by a dashcam video still showing Rayner's hand dropping a foreign object by the passenger seat. There was no need to reconstruct the scenario, no added commentary. When the truth is visible, it needs no defense or translation. A well-known social media account in the legal community, once accused of discrimination, also shared the post, adding, "Not every black person has the truth found, but when someone like Boone is framed and the camera speaks up, that is the day the whole system wakes up." In a small cafe in the city's west, just blocks from the department headquarters, 3 law students watched the original clip on a tablet. One said quietly, "I used to think the truth needed someone to shout it." The other replied, "Now it's clear. All it takes is a camera that doesn't bow." No one mentioned Boone's name, but all 3 kept their eyes fixed on the moment the dash cam caught the badge-wearing hand dropping something in the car. They did not debate the law. They just sat still, watching. At the neighboring state's patrol post, which used the same dashcam model, a crisis meeting was held among team leaders. One raised a hand. "Are we allowed to manually erase data now?" The chief answered, "No. And because of the Boone case, that right has been removed from the system code." Silence filled the room. Another tapped a pen on the table and said, "So, the machine beat the badge." Boone knew nothing about these whispers. He did not watch the news, log into social media, or click on links sent to him. On Friday afternoon, he walked past the operations building, seeing a group of technicians installing a new backup storage system for patrol cars. A technician turned, recognized him, and was about to shake hands. Boone just nodded and kept walking. That night, in his dark office, Boone took out an old photo from his drawer. He and his father, on his first day with the department, stood by the first service car with a crookedly mounted camera. Boone then lacked the muscle he had now, his eyes still innocent. His father, a veteran officer, always told him, "You might make mistakes, but the camera never does. Live as if it's always watching." Macklin lynched the major's head, spun away with both arms. Boone looked at the photo, folded it, slipped it into his pocket, stood up, turned off the lights, and left. The red light from the recording device still glowed on the ceiling, tireless, unwavering. That was the true witness, and from now on, it would never be forced into silence again. 1 week after the final meeting of the department, Boone received an email in his official inbox from the Rylance State Police Academy containing a formal invitation. "We would be honored if you could come speak directly to the senior cadets to help them understand that a blink in this profession can be the line between error and justice." The email included a photo of Boone from the Justice News and a link to an article titled, "The Man Who Refused Honors Chose Silence." Boone did not respond immediately. He opened his computer, extracted the dashcam footage from his storage, clipped the exact segment from the moment the vehicle was pulled over to the clear moment captured by the camera of Rayner bending down, left hand reaching into the car, placing a nylon package near the passenger seat. No fast forward, no background music. He named the file Evidence That Doesn't Lie, then sent it back to the academy with the note, "I don't teach, I just provide the truth." No one expected Boone to agree to come in person, but the truth he sent was played a week later in the large auditorium of the academy, in front of over 200 cadets. The classroom had no soundtrack. Every click, the wind noise from the dashcam's built-in mic, and the soft sound of an object dropping onto the car floor are chillingly clear. No one in the room spoke a word. The instructor stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen as if trying to read every expression on Rayner's face in each frame. When the video ended, the screen froze on Boone, pressed against the car, not yelling, not resisting, just staring straight into the front camera. A tall cadet with a buzz cut, wearing a name tag, Velasquez, raised his hand. He asked in a calm but thoughtful voice, "What if there was no camera then? Would we have a fabricated case, or just a story no one would believe?" The instructor looked directly at him, but didn't answer immediately. He walked to the whiteboard, took a marker, and wrote 3 lines. "No camera, no case, no justice." After a brief pause, he said, "And if this didn't happen, then what are you here to learn this morning? If that clip didn't exist, what would we be teaching? And how many more innocent people must suffer similarly, in silence, in the dark, because everyone thinks cameras are just accessories, not witnesses. Someone at the back bowed their head. The instructor scanned the room and continued. Boone is not a hero. He didn't step onto a podium for praise or statues, but he left the one thing that should make you think long after today's lesson. Justice doesn't come from kindness, but from mechanisms that stop evil from acting. The room remained silent. No applause, yet no one left their seats, even though the class had ended 5 minutes earlier. Outside the hallway, a group of cadets stood in a circle, whispering. One said, "He knew he could be silenced, yet he stayed calm till the end." Another replied, "Not calm, knowing he was being recorded." The statement quieted everyone again. In a world full of thousands of cameras but still too much darkness, the meaning of a silent device that tells the truth suddenly became more sacred than any badge. In a neighboring room, the law enforcement training coordinator sat with program advisors. They discussed making the clip part of the official curriculum. One said, "I want this taught in the first year, not waiting until senior year." Another nodded, "Because arrogance starts early, but conscience takes a lifetime to learn." The next morning, the academy issued a notice. The Boone Rainer Dashcam video would be mandatory in the course Emergency Response and Ethical Risk Recognition. The content would be unedited, without voiceover or commentary. Each cadet was required to write a personal report after viewing, with the single question, "If you were Rainer, do you think you would be caught?" And if the answer was "not sure," that report had to be twice as long. In another city, Boone received news from the department's new policy officer. They were considering a proposal to mandate dual storage systems for all patrol cameras, a backup copy sent to a federal center, and an encrypted version for independent verification in case of disputes. Boone did not comment, just nodded over the phone. His tone was neither pleased nor bitter. He simply said, "Better late than never." That evening, Boone walked past a small park behind the department's headquarters. A group of teenagers was reenacting the clip's scene, filming themselves with phones, assigning roles, and rehearsing. A 12-year-old boy played the officer, holding a candy box, mimicking the motion of placing something in the car and shouting, "I just found the evidence." The group laughed. Then a girl snapped, "You can't do that. The camera saw everything." Boone stood back, hands in pockets, streetlight casting shadows across his cheekbones. He didn't intervene. He just smiled softly, then turned away, leaving behind children learning how to recognize right from wrong. Not from books, but from images that can't be erased, denied, or ignored. Justice doesn't need a podium. Sometimes it only needs to be in the right place at the right time and never look away. Boone stood next to his car for a long moment before opening the door. The nighttime air in the parking garage carried the scent of cold steel and old oil stains, while the fluorescent lights overhead flickered shadows that seemed unable to leave behind what had happened. He inserted the key, turned the ignition, and the cabin lit up. The dashcam screen read, "Saved. 48 minutes, triple authentication." He stared at that message as someone who had lost too much, but was grateful that this time what needed to be seen had been recorded. Boone did not start the engine right away. He sat in the driver's seat, eyes scanning the dashboard, checking every detail as was his routine before each journey. His right hand touched the screen, toggling to the main interface. No new alerts. No officers outside the window asking for an inspection. Still, he checked the signal path and confirmed the system was quietly linked to the Department of Justice's storage center. Every passing second, the front camera kept recording, not with weapons, but with unwavering reliability. A soft noise echoed up ahead. Another patrol car, its silver paint streaked with mud, was parked at an angle, blocking Boone's exit. Its lights were on, but did not flash. The windows were blacked out, and no one stepped out. Boone did not lower his window or sound the horn. He leaned, pressed the dashcam angle adjustment, aimed the frame at the other car's nose, and waited. The ventilation carried a hint of burnt fuel, as if to remind him that even 3 levels below the street, some confrontations never truly end. The car in front remained motionless for 20 seconds, then slowly reversed. No turn signal, no gesture. Boone said nothing. He waited until the path was wide enough, then eased out, hands steady on the wheel, eyes never leaving the road. The dashcam kept rolling. There was no strange noise, but the silence meant something new. Once, silence signaled cover-ups. Now, it meant caution. No one dared act carelessly, knowing something unsleeping was watching every move. Boone left the garage and merged into the sparse flow of city traffic. Each street lamp reflected the car's shadow, trailing behind as a reminder that every action, even silent ones, leaves a mark. He did not turn on the music or the GPS. His memory was enough to take him anywhere, even if no one called his name anymore. Elsewhere in the city, a committee was meeting in secret. They debated upgrading surveillance systems and officially naming the new proposal after Boone's case. The suggested title was the DASH Act, short for Data Authenticated Surveillance for Harm Prevention. Someone recommended Boone Clause, but it was rejected, not out of disregard, but because Boone himself had said, "If you need a symbol, choose the camera. It does not tire, forget, or discriminate." Meanwhile, Boone drove over the southern overpass, once the city's most frequently policed checkpoint. No more barricades, no more sirens. But public cameras still glowed. At a stoplight, a small truck ahead paused a second, then drove on. A glance from its cabin toward Boone's car. Maybe they recognized him, maybe not, but it no longer mattered. Boone stopped at an intersection near a gas station, not to refuel, just to sit and watch the light reflected on the windshield, as if checking himself in a mirror that cannot lie. He knew there were more people like Rayner out there, and not everyone would be lucky enough to have a dash cam record the whole truth. But as long as the camera exists, words are not the only thing that determines what is right. When the light turned green, Boone turned his car, not heading home but toward the central data facility, where cameras are encrypted with double keys and backed up in a third cloud layer. He stopped, stepped out, carrying nothing but a slim folder and his verification codes. He handed the file to the night shift clerk, no badge needed. The clerk recognized him from the lobby camera. No one said thank you, no one said sorry. Only action. Unlock, check the data, and send it for verification. Boone turned away before the last step was done. On his way out, he passed an electronic board. Image volume, 812 hours/day. Reliability, 99.91%. Boone glanced up, not pressing his lips or smiling, just acknowledging. That was enough. As he returned to his car, the garage cameras automatically shifted, locking their frame on his movements. Boone did not look back. He didn't need to. He knew every frame behind him, every streak of light in the hallway, and the data just archived. The truth was still there, not repentant, not proud, simply present. And now, no one dared turn away. Boone was not the first to be set up, but he was the first to have undeniable evidence. A short dashcam video triggered a series of events, from internal investigations and public confrontations to a courtroom drama that shook the entire system. Ultimately, a whole structure that once believed itself above reproach was forced to take a hard look at itself. Kip Rayner once gave himself the right to judge who was guilty, based on skin color, body type, and the vehicle they drove. But his arrogance blinded him to the fact that this time, things had changed. He forgot that Boone's dashcam not only recorded the footage but also streamed it live to a data center secured by the Department of Justice's new 3-layer authentication standard. When the footage of his hand placing a suspicious package into the car was magnified frame by frame, and his prejudiced remarks were audible in the recording, all previously overlooked cases had to be reopened. Boone did not give lengthy speeches during the hearings. He avoided TV appearances and refused any honors. To him, justice did not require applause. It required steadfastness and the courage to uphold principles even when faith was broken. He once said, and remained true until the end, "I don't want to be the next person framed." Because of that, many victims, once dismissed as paranoid, were exonerated. A community petition for dashcam legislation was filed, and police training programs began, mandating courses on integrity before the lens. Boone's story did not cause instant change, but it achieved something greater. It rekindled the concept of individual accountability within a collective long been hiding behind procedures. From police academies to federal coordination offices, people began reviewing footage not just to settle cases, but to learn how to face uncomfortable truths. The most important lesson did not come from sirens or press conferences, but from the silent presence of a tireless witness. The Dashcam, always ready, always honest, and indifferent to who deserves protection. Boone did not seek to be remembered. The only legacy he left was a standard: let the truth speak for itself and prepare to face it. If the justice system had ever been doubted because of its people, this time, technology pulled it back on course. And if anything deserved honor after all this, it was the unwavering resolve not to compromise, not to stay silent, not to look away in the face of wrongdoing. In an era where digital evidence can be altered, voices can be manipulated, and public opinion swayed, the steadfastness of a front-facing camera combined with Boone's courage was enough to rewrite the order. The case ended not with medals or statues, but with real change. The system no longer dared to be lenient with itself, knowing it was always being watched. And this time, the truth won. Thank you for staying with this story until the very last moment. This is not a tale of a hero, but of a person who chose to stand tall when silence would have been easier. Elric Boone did not fight with grand speeches, but with unwavering resolve, with a dashcam always running, and with the belief that if he did not back down, the truth would not disappear. If something inside you ached while watching until this point, do not let it fade. Share this, not for views, but because there are still so many Boones out there who must protect themselves, and sometimes just one camera at the right moment can be enough to save an entire life from accusations no one bothers to verify.